So they're going to be, I don't know, I think it's between 400 and 500 questions on it. How many questions?
Right.
Well, I'll tell you what, let me look real quick and I will find out how many. Oh, Claire, I'm just kidding. It's not going to be 400 or 500. Let me look that up real quick here and I will tell you.
Do we need to bring our laptops or is it paper?
Yeah, bring your laptop. It will be on Canvas, okay? But I'm going to help you out here just by telling you how many are on it. Let's see. This computer seems to be working better today. Hmm. Let me see. The exam contains 59 questions, all true, false, or multiple choice. Okay, but I'm gonna help you on Tuesday with the review. Will be very helpful. Just don't panic yet. Okay. Did we talk at all about William Donald McClure, or did we end before that?
We ended with,
Yeah, we haven't. Did we finish Chet Bitterman
yes.
on his execution on a bus? Okay, so we're ready for William Donald McClure. I don't want to end the semester just talking about people being murdered. Okay, this is we're going to get a little bit beyond that. Okay, who was this guy? Well, he was a Pennsylvanian, born in Pennsylvania in 1906, and he was a jack of all trades. My dad was that kind of a guy. He'd just do a lot of things. Although my dad was not a teacher or evangelist, in fact, he wasn't a Christian most of his life, but this guy was very well prepared, and just did a lot of things. Who are some other people who were kind of jack of all trades people that we've met before? Wasn't Carey kind of that way? Carey was a botanist, you know, and he had a lot of gifts. Yeah. I don't know about Judson as much, but so McClure was ministering in Khartoum. Where's that at? I'll find out. Where's Khartoum? Khartoum is the capital city of what country?
Sudan.
Okay, Sudan, right? So I think it neighbors Congo. Okay. Yeah, the South Sudan does. There it is. Sudan is a huge country. Khartoum is the capital. And you can see the lighter area is more of the desert, the Sahara. And then you see the sub-Saharan. By the way, you guys don't know that this part is called sub-Saharan because it's the part that's south of the Sahara. What does the word Sahara mean? It means desert. Just like the word Jordan means river. So the Jordan River is the river, and the Sahara Desert is the desert. So you can just say the Jordan or the Sahara. Isn't that cool? Extra credit. All right. So he served there in the capital city and in other places as well. And he was untrained and an unlicensed physician. But back at that time, it didn't matter. If you knew anything about medicine and there was a need, then they called on you. Okay, we didn't have all the litigation, you know, and all the standards and things in medicine that are becoming more normal in other countries. Okay, so his emphasis was on evangelism and the neglect of missionaries there. So even though he had some medical training, he really wanted to focus on evangelism. In fact, he hesitated to do things medically if he was asked to, because he knew that he wasn't really qualified, as he should have been. And of course, just like in so many African nations, when the current political power moved out, power vacuum ensued, and that's really what ended up resulting in his death. Okay, it wasn't because he was there as a doctor or a missionary; it was because of the problem going on politically. So many African countries have had that: Liberia, Congo, CAR, Libya. You could name so many countries where that's happened. So there is what we call the what? What's that whole section called?
The 1040.
Yeah, that's 1040 window. Okay, and as you can see, Sudan, it fits in that. All of North Africa basically does. This is the region where we're talking about 2/3 of the world's population live there. And of course, not to mention that the two largest, most populated countries in the world, China and India, are also part of that. Okay, so he's just another case of somebody got caught in the crossfire. When you think about somebody getting caught in crossfire and dying on the mission field, what recent occurrence comes to mind?
Maybe like people who are in Israel and stuck in that conflict, or Ukraine.
Yeah, right. A lot of people, they go to the mission field knowing that there is more of a chance of them dying because of political issues than there is because of religious ones. That's the type of thing a lot of people have had to face. Gracia Burnham, you've heard of her story, right? Her husband, they were killed in the Philippines. It was guerrillas that came in when they were actually away on a little vacation, and guerrillas came in and captured them, and they were in captivity for a year or more. And there was an attempt made to rescue them, and her husband actually was killed in the crossfire. He wasn't even the target. He was, at least that's my understanding. She's actually going to be here for the Refresh conference, and so she'll give the story straight. But my understanding is that he was shot and killed in crossfire between those who were the guerrillas and those who were trying to. By the way, the word guerrilla, if you know Spanish at all, what's the word for war? Anybody here know the Spanish word for war? It's the same as the Portuguese word guerra. Let me just put it up here for you. Some Spanish and Portuguese words happen to be the same, but I think in Spanish you would say guerra, but in Portuguese it's two R's, it's like an H, guerra. And so guerra is war, and then ILLA in Spanish is the little something, so little war. And the idea is that guerrilla warfare is normally done by small packs of people that upset. They do surprise attacks on big organized, troops, the opposition. And so the idea of little warriors or little war is where the word guerrilla, that's literally what the word means. And it's been around from time immemorial. It's probably the most ancient, form of warfare in human history. Okay. But think of it in opposition to the very organized, the larger armies, these guys do surprise attacks, ambushes, things like that. Okay, new methods and strategies. Well, in the 20th century, 1900s, you see this combination of the strategist and the practitioner. Okay, even here at Faith, I see students, I meet students. Some are more, academically wired, and others actually do a better job with hands-on. They just like that kind of stuff. Any of you here can say, I'm really more of a hands-on kind of a person. I like mechanics or, I do well with my hands. I'm better at that, and I enjoy that more than I do book study. Maybe you like that or not?
I think it goes both ways. I mean, I really like both.
Okay, all right. It's nice to have a balance between both. I know some students that just say, I'm enjoying my studies, but I'd much rather be out doing something with my hands, tearing an engine apart or, something like that. And so the strategist is usually the guy that's more of the bookworm, the thinker, and the practitioner. Not that the practitioner doesn't think, but that his real strength is being able to make things happen that the strategist can't do. The strategist can think about things. Here we need, be cool to do this and that, but we need somebody who's practical that can get that done. And these kind of come together. Professional training, we've already talked about that. What name comes to your mind when we think about formal Bible college training? Which missionary really played a key role in helping to get Bible Institute started?
Moody?
Well, Moody was a fruit of that. Moody Bible Institute,
Nyack, you're talking about?
yeah, this guy helped found Nyack College, right? Who was he? In New York?
Simpson?
Yep, A.B. Simpson. Yep. Okay, here's a way to help remember that. A.B. Think of your alphabet. Okay, alphabet, school. A.B. Simpson helped start schools. That help you? See, little tricks like that. You'll never forget that now, will you? I was going to say, remember your ABCs. His name is ABS, but it doesn't quite work. And ABS is something in your car that lights up right when your brake system isn't working, right? Okay, I just confused you. All right, caution regarding Western imperialism. 20th century really, really showed these countries that are becoming more of their, standing on their own 2 feet, so to speak. They become increasingly sensitive toward Western imperialism. And, we're living in a time now when everybody gets that. I don't know of any missionaries or agencies right now that are saying we need to go in and implant, the American way or the European way. It's just, I think we've gotten beyond that. And then in 1972, there was the founding of the American Society of Missiology. There's that word that, was never known, never. There was a time when if you talked about getting a doctorate in missiology, it was considered a Sunday school doctorate. It just wasn't a true academic degree. But now it is. The interesting thing is it's called a D-Miss. M-I-S-S. Well, a guy that I know that's very, very intelligent, very scholarly, he has a D-Miss. All right, religious pluralism also becomes a problem in the 20th century. It always has been, but this idea of inclusivism, that doesn't matter if you so much what you believe as long as we all love Jesus, we can work together. The ecumenical idea. Next semester in current issues of missiology class, we are going to talk about this issue in some detail, inclusivism and exclusivism. And then the idea of church growth and people groups. Okay, we'll talk about Donald McGavran, maybe yet today. And Donald McGavran is really the one that popularized the use of the term people groups rather than political, national designations. All right, I already mentioned ecumenical missions. If you go online and you look up an agency and the agency either doesn't have a doctrinal statement at all or just maybe 2 or 3 things, probably want to be careful, okay? Because it might be sending the message that you can believe pretty much what you want as long as we can work together to honor God. Okay, let's take time to talk about Donald McGavran. That is a name you really should remember in recent missions history. I'm talking about mid-1900s, okay? Donald McGavran was actually born on the mission field in India in 1897, right? His parents and his grandparents were both missionaries. He was a 3rd generation missionary. A lot of missions background. And he studied at Butler. Who here would be happy to hear that at our college? Which one of our professors at Butler grad? Dr. Josh Boyd. Yeah. When Butler won the NCAA championship, what, 2 or 3 years ago, I think it was. Yeah, he was celebrating, Butler. He was influenced by the student volunteer movement. How many people have we seen who were influenced by that? Just so many. And he was as well. So he ends up going back to India, and he spends time there as an adult missionary, serving in the areas of education, medicine, translation, and evangelism. Oh, jack of all trades. There we go. He was very gifted. Right. He wrote over a dozen books, and a couple of those we make reference to in our classes. He became increasingly interested in the phenomenon of mass movement and church growth. Okay, yeah, one of the things that you should remember about Donald McGavran is that he liked this idea of focusing on a particular people group. Even if you're in an area where there's a mixture of ethnicities, okay? If you go into an area that is a mixture of several ethnicities, there's two ways you could approach that. One is to say, we're going to try to reach people from all of these ethnicities and establish an international church, a multilingual or multi-ethnic church, okay? And there are lots of missionaries that do that. I was in a church in Tokyo once that was called Tokyo Baptist Church, but it had, I don't know, 4 or 5 major ethnicities in the church. They did everything in English, and most of the people from those ethnic groups, spoke English. So the services were all done in English, but it was definitely a multi-ethnic church. The other view is to go in and say, I'm going to choose one of these ethnicities and try to, work hard to plant a church among these people. Then after that, I can move on to another ethnic group. And that second approach is the approach that Donald McGavran really pushed for. He said people already have to make enough adjustments just in coming to Christ. So why should we confuse that further by trying to get them to be mixing with people of other language groups and other cultural customs? It just makes it so hard. So he really pushed for what he called the homogeneous group, the going to this with the same ethnic group, homogeneous, same genetics, okay? And he was somewhat critical of people that tried to, get people from all over the place, because he said it's just too hard for them and to adjust. And so, my view on that, I just think God does both. And I think you just need to be sensitive to what the Lord is leading you to do, okay? And he was really one of the pioneers of this whole idea of studying church growth. He believed in using statistics. Here's a guy that was in medicine, education, right? What else? Yeah, translate. I mean, this guy was used to dealing with statistics and numbers a lot. So he really pushed this idea of observing trends in church growth, what makes that happen. And today there's a lot out there about that. All right, the Institute of Church Growth. Speaking of which, he founded that in 1961 at Northwest Christian College in Eugene, Oregon. But then he moved south down to California in 1965, 4 years later, and he started working at Fuller Theological Seminary. Have you guys studied Fuller in any of your other classes? Like, anybody here done the Baptist Faith and Practice course? Okay. Fuller Seminary is not a fundamentalist school, okay? It's very broad evangelical. My brother is a graduate of Fuller. He's in Colorado now, but he studied in Fuller. Fuller holds to the basic tenets of the Christian faith, but they're very, very open to a lot of things. And so, but he taught there. And you can see the bullet points below that he highlighted in his philosophy of missions. First of all, he was really dissatisfied with the rate of world evangelization. So he's looking at the big picture. And you got to remember, in 1965, the ability even to do that is limited, right? I mean, nowadays you can go online and find statistics until they come out of your ears, But in those days, it was really hard work just to come up with basic numbers. But he did, he worked on that, and he said there's gotta be a faster way, a more efficient way to do the work of missions. He kind of had disregard for methods in and of themselves. He wasn't a big methods guy. He he believed that just going in and working among a particular group of people, was the best way, and don't get too hung up on methodologies. He placed priority on the incorporation of converts into the church. In other words, evangelism is not enough. We have to get people busy and involved. Why our church is not growing faster? Why are they not stronger? Because people aren't challenged to serve. They get saved and they're just expected to come. Okay? I hope that you guys don't attend or aren't members of churches like that. It's okay if you don't do anything as long as you show up on Sunday. That's just not healthy for anybody. And so, he placed a high priority on getting people involved in their churches. Goal-oriented thinking. He believed in what he himself called fierce pragmatism. He believed in, and I'm not sure I understand the difference between disregarding methods and being fiercely pragmatic, because usually those two go together. But anyway, he, in other words, he wasn't a big fan of a bunch of theological theory. He believed that people needed to see how the truth of God's word plays out in their lives. And I agree with that. People need to see how we live the truth that we believe. And he was a huge fan of that. And then he employed research as his chief tool, and that goes along with these other things. So what's one of the, can you think of a major group that does research today? I mean, research in the area of missions or Christianity? Any groups come to mind?
Joshua Project?
Yeah, the Joshua Project is, man, loaded with research. And where did the Joshua Project come from? It came from a guy that Donald McGavran invited to join him at Fuller. We'll talk about him next. That guy started the Joshua Project. What's another big one that you may or may not have heard of? It came out really strongly in the 80s and 90s. Have you heard of the Barna group? George Barna? Barna was a guy who, I mean, if you had grown up in the 80s and 90s, and you would have heard his name. He kind of did the same type of thing that McGavran was doing. He's got all kinds of church growth statistics out there. Just sometime look up Barna Group, B-A-R-N-A, George Barna, and you'll find that kind of stuff. We actually have who was it? Oh, you all know the former president of CBM, Bill Jenkins. Bill Jenkins, you've heard. He has a son who actually works for the Barna Group. Okay, and so they're continuing to do a lot of research. So Joshua Project and the Barna Group are two. The Pew Research, we've used some statistics from Pew Research, although I don't think that's a Christian organization. The Pew is the name of a person, not the name of a bench in a church. Okay. But that's also, they have quite a good section on evangelical statistics that you can look up as well. So those three come to mind: Joshua Project, Barna Group, Pew Research. They're pretty solid. But this guy was a pioneer in this stuff. And he had a new way of approaching it. I'm just going to tell you guys, honestly, if somebody comes to me today and says, hey, we have a brand new way of doing missions we want to talk to you about. Well, what's your first reaction? And people kind of looked at him that way, But sometimes people come up with something new that's really worth considering. So one of the things that he promoted, and I agree with, is the limitation of the mission station. What's a mission station?
It's like the compound where the missionaries live.
Right. In Africa, they were often called compounds, and other places. It's the little American or European or, Western neighborhood, kind of the little bubble where the missionaries all live. And so, you do your work outside the compound. At night, you come home, and the compound is your neighborhood. And we've talked about that, right? He did not like that. Why? What's the problem with it? What's the weakness of the mission station?
It separates you from the people you're trying to reach.
And it communicates what to them? You're right. What does it communicate to them?
Or you could say they don't want to be around your culture, or you don't want to be around their culture.
Okay, yes,
Or escape from them, I guess.
yep, you're too good for us, you don't want to be around our culture, good, what else? How does it project Christianity? To those people in the country, looking at people living on that compound, Christianity is what? It's a religion of whom?
Westerners?
Yeah, it's a Western idea. Christianity is Western. And that's something that missionaries have had to fight against a lot, okay, in 2/3 majority world countries. It's just this idea that if you're going to follow Jesus, you're going to follow the Westerns. Okay, so here's my question for you: is Christianity a Western religion?
For a lot of time, it's been predominant in the Western world, but that doesn't mean it's a Western religion.
Okay. And you're right. That's a good way of saying it. It has been predominant, not to some degree, maybe even in numbers, but in the ability of the West because of its resources to propagate Christianity. Yeah. If I were to say to you, Christianity is a Western religion, what would you say to me to defend against that idea?
Did it start in the West?
Yeah, where did it start?
Started in the Middle East?
Yeah, it started in the Middle East, in Jerusalem, right? I mean, how long was it before Christianity really became, a major thing in the West? Well, it was moving west from the very beginning, right? Paul moved westward, and eventually, the Roman Empire, starts adopting Christianity in the 400s or so, or late 300s, right? But it didn't start in the West. It thrived in the West. The Roman Empire, Great Britain, United States. Okay, but yeah. So that's something he was concerned about. All right, and then number two there, the need for people movements. And there's that word that I shared with you before, homogeneous, which is the idea of the same genetics, same ethnicity, right? So focus on that. Now, I would say this to you guys. If you're, let's say that you're in an urban center where there are lots of ethnicities, okay? And they're all living in high rises, in the same neighborhood, basically. Here's what I would say. If those people are accustomed to working together and their children go to school together and the mix is part of their daily lives, then starting a multi-ethnic church is not going to be such a big deal, right? Because they're used to interacting with other ethnicities at school and at work. So I would say that if that's the reality of the people you're trying to reach, I would not be against it. But just because you have several ethnicities living in the same city does not mean that they interact. Or even if they do interact, it may be that it's only done on a professional level. And when they go home, they have nothing to do with the other ethnicities. You know what I'm saying? Just because you see kids from 4 or 5 different ethnicities and language groups in the same school does not necessarily mean that when they're out of school, that they continue to interact with each other. So there's a lot of study that needs to be done, questions that you have to ask when you're moving into a community like that. He believed in he was not in favor of multi-individual conversions, which is the idea that you reach a few from here, a few from there, a few from there, and you try to bring them all together. Because the thinking of a lot of that is, okay, if we reach, a few here, a few here, a few from several ethnicities, then they become part of the Christian family. So they have a new family. Well, that's true. We are a family as a group of believers. But at the same time that you're forming that family, you're also taking them out of their families. And sometimes that's necessary. Jesus said that the gospel is going to divide, right? But his position was, let's not make that our priority. Let's make our priority trying to reach people in the same ethnicity. He got some feedback, some kickback on that. would not take a position for or against either way. Like I said before, I think it does depend on how God, leads you to do that. And then corporate decisions rather than individual decisions. Okay. In other words, he said, let's really work hard to see entire families come to Christ together. So he would not be in favor, for example, of going to a mission field and then using a children's ministry to reach children for Christ, and then he would say, let's do ministries that include the entire family. Let's try to use strategies that involve the family and really work toward the head of the household first rather than the children. Because a lot of strategies start with children, and the idea is if we can win children to Christ, then maybe that'll give us an in to their homes, see? And sometimes that does work. But how many parents are ready to trust Christ because of, their 6-year-old that came to Christ? I mean, that's tough. I'm not saying it can't work. But his strategy was, let's go for the family leader, and try to win entire families to Christ. And he would even argue from the book of Acts where you see, entire families come to Christ. Lydia's family, Cornelius' family, right? In Corinth, you have Crispus, the synagogue leader, his whole family. And then who's the other one? There's 4 of them. I mentioned Cornelius, Lydia, the jailer's family as well. Okay. So that's just something you need to think about, if you're working in a missions context. So he comes up with the homogeneous unit principle, and he presents this address at the 1974 Lausanne Congress. Remember that picture I showed, that great big gathering of people last time? That's that group, 1974 Lausanne. Billy Graham was a main speaker at that Congress in 74. He was actually accused of being racially prejudiced. Because when he said, we need to go after concentrate on one ethnic group, many people thought that he was showing bias. He wasn't. Remember, he wasn't thinking racially, he was thinking practically, right? But he was accused by some of being racial. And I don't know the man. I didn't know the man at all, but I mean, I don't know enough about him to say whether if you have to choose among several ethnicities, which one you're going to go after, how do you choose? So, there were people who thought he was kind of racial, but I just don't think that was the case. I think he was being more practical than racial. 2 stages of Christianization: discipling them, leading them to Christ, and perfecting them. And that kind of ties in with the idea of getting more people involved in their churches. He was really big on that. When people come to Christ, they should recognize the contribution that they are expected to make in their churches. This is a bit of a controversial thinker, but he wasn't afraid to think outside the box. He had strong feelings. He taught at Fuller for several years. Opposition and accusations. John Yoder, who was a leader in the missions world at that time, actually thought he was being dishonest by manipulating statistics and figures and things like that. I don't think he was. Rene Padilla, who was a Latin American mission strategist, it was a he, by the way. Rene, this guy wasn't a girl, but he thought that he was doing theological maneuvering. He was, taking scripture, abusing the context of scripture to come up with his ideas, like the family conversions, things like that. And he was accused of wanting quantity over quality. Again, I disagree with all those to a large extent. I mean, there may have been some justification, but to rule him out, to write him off because of that, it just shows you that there was conflict in thinking. The 20th century, there's no century in human history that involved rapid technological development change like the 20th century. And along with that comes a whole lot of innovative thinking and criticisms and argumentation and things like that, because things are happening so quickly that you hardly have time to sit down and analyze what's happening. So he was in the middle of all that. But when all the dust was settled, I think most people today would tell you he used to be highly respected and appreciated for what he did. So here, what is his lasting impact? Well, he raised a lot of questions. Is that such a bad thing? I raise questions every time we have a quiz. Yeah, nothing wrong with raising questions. He was profoundly influenced by an Indian woman. One of the compounds in India where he was before he came back to the States. On that compound, remember, that's where all the missionaries lived. Mission station, compound, same thing. And there was this Indian woman that was one of the servants in the homes. She cleaned and cooked. And none of the missionaries there ever tried to witness to her and to lead her to Christ. They viewed her more as an employee for them on the compound. They did their missionary work outside the compound. So because she was working and living on the compound, she never even heard the gospel. Nobody, and he recognized that, and that really caught his attention. And it bothered him, and it should have bothered him. It should bother anybody. And it's one of the things that moved in the direction. We got to get out of this compound mentality and get in among the people and win them. He died in 1990 at the age of 92. Lived a ripe old age of 92. The oldest of our parents, my wife and I, my parents, my dad, who lived to be 89. Longer than anybody, the other four. All right, we got to touch on Ralph Winter. I'm just going to start because we got about 2 minutes. Because Ralph Winter is connected in many ways with McGavran. Ralph Winter died like 10 years ago, so he's more recent. He was born in 1924 in LA. I remember McGavran was born where?
India.
India, right? He moved to Oregon and then he went to LA or to California to Fuller Seminary. Well, Winter studied engineering at Caltech. He and his father both. I'm amazed at how many guys end up in ministry who were engineers. God uses a lot of people with engineering background in the work of the ministry. Interesting how that works. He served in the Navy. So he studied engineering at Caltech in California, served in the Navy, and he got a PhD from Cornell University. Got a theology degree from Princeton. Princeton's out east, right? One of the Ivy League schools. A pretty brilliant guy, very highly qualified academically. I don't know what his PhD was. I'm guessing it was probably in engineering somewhere. I'm not sure. His theology degree. Now, Princeton by that time was not a stalwart, fundamental institution. It became pretty liberal. But he was a true evangelical. He really was. I think we're going to have to stop here and talk about him later, okay? Is there another? Yeah, we'll stop there. But these two guys you should remember together, Donald McGavran, Ralph Winter. Keep them coupled in your mind. All right, Monday and Tuesday. Monday we'll finish this. Tuesday we'll do the review. And then I'll bring you all to stake at the final exam. Was that recorded? Sorry, Clara.